We're going to look at the birth of Jesus. All of us are familiar with the stories of Jesus' birth. We have the traditional nativity scene that shows Mary, Joseph, and the three wise men. And of course, Jesus in the manger. So we're familiar with these. But I want to break them down. I want to look at them a little bit more closely. First thing we're going to look at are the similarities. All of the birth narratives, the ones we have in Matthew and Luke, they both have Jesus born in Bethlehem. Now this fulfills the messianic prophecy regarding where Jesus would be born. Now Matthew has Mary and Joseph actually living in Bethlehem and then having to move to Nazareth. Luke has Mary and Joseph living in Nazareth and then having to go to Bethlehem because of the census. And then later they return to Nazareth. Now, Nazareth is approximately 70 miles from Bethlehem. So while it may not be considered a hard trip, it was not a trip that was easy to make. But both birth narratives also have Jesus raised in Nazareth. So while he's born in Bethlehem, he's raised in Nazareth. This is consistent with what appears in all the Gospels, because it was common knowledge, and the Gospels agree, that Jesus was called a Nazarene. In other words, he was from Nazareth, and that's how people understood him. So while he may have been born in Bethlehem, he was known as a Nazarene. Now, a third similarity is that both have the nature of Jesus' conception as miraculous. Matthew has this explained by having an angel appear to Joseph in a dream. Luke has the angel Gabriel appear directly to Mary. A fourth similarity is that both Matthew and Luke make the point that Joseph is not the biological father of Jesus. Both use the term Holy Spirit, showing that the child, that Jesus, is from God. Now, some people will bring this up and they'll say, well, wait a minute. Messianic promise said that the Messiah was going to be a descendant of David. So if Joseph is not the biological father, how could Jesus be the Messiah? Well, within Jewish tradition, as long as Joseph accepted Jesus as his own, Jesus inherited all the family history of Joseph. So because Joseph accepted Jesus as his son, Jesus was still considered a descendant of David. Now, a fifth similarity. In both Gospels, the angel says that his name is going to be Jesus. The child is given the name Jesus. Jesus is simply the Greek word for the Hebrew Yeshua, which is actually Jesus' actual name. We know it as Joshua. So Jesus is the Greek for the Hebrew Joshua, generally translated as Yahweh saves. That's how early Christians translated the name Joshua. And this indicates the mission of Jesus. From the moment of his conception, his name indicated who he was. Yahweh saves. Now, the sixth and final similarity I want to talk about is that within both Gospels, Jesus' birth is recognized by those outside the family. Matthew has Jesus' birth recognized by the Magi. Luke has Jesus' birth recognized by the shepherds, by the priest Simeon, and by Anna. And we will talk about the importance of these figures later. Okay, now that we've looked at some of the similarities, let's look at the differences. Because, like the genealogies, the differences give us a window into the theology of the individual Gospels. The first difference has to do with Jesus' birth. While both have Jesus born in Bethlehem, there are differences. Luke wants to set Jesus' birth in the larger context of what is going on in the world, and particularly the Roman world, almost like a history. So he talks about Caesar Augustus and Quirinius, the governor of Syria. Matthew's concern focuses on the Judean world. He talks about Herod the Great. These differences tell us something about the communities to whom they were writing. Luke is writing to a Gentile community outside of Judea. His message is available to non-Jews. Matthew is writing to a Jewish community who is concerned with the events around Judea and possibly may actually be a community that lived within the area of Judea at the time. Now, the second difference between the birth narrative is the message of Jesus' birth to Joseph and Mary, how the message is delivered. Luke has an angel appear to Mary and to Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. The angel, or the messenger, is a common motif in the Old Testament when delivering a message from God to an individual. So Luke just used this common style of messaging to talk about how Jesus' birth came about. Matthew has communications with Joseph not through an angel directly, but through a dream, also with the Magi. The communication happens through a dream. Now, Matthew is purposely here making a connection between Joseph the dreamer in Genesis and Joseph the dreamer, Jesus' father. For Matthew, in Matthew's birth narrative, it reads like a second Exodus story. For Matthew, Jesus is seen as a Moses figure, a second lawgiver. So he uses imagery from Exodus. You have Joseph the dreamer. You have Moses, whose life is saved from the Pharaoh by being put into the Nile. You have Jesus, who Herod is trying to kill and has to flee to Egypt. So you have Moses also returning to Egypt and meeting his brother Aaron. Mary and Joseph return to Egypt because of the dream, the message in the dream that Joseph receives. Moses leads his people out of Egypt and to the promised land. Jesus also comes back out of Egypt, and eventually they settle in Nazareth. There are parallels throughout Matthew's gospel regarding Jesus and Moses. Jesus has the Sermon on the Mount just as Moses gives the people the law from Mount Sinai. There are other parallels, and some of them we will be looking at as we look at the Gospel of Matthew. A third difference in the two birth narratives is both have Jesus recognized by others, but they're different people. Luke has Jesus recognized by shepherds, Simeon, and Anna. What is significant about this in Luke is that all three people were not people of status. Shepherds were actually considered outsiders and untrustworthy. Simeon was aged. Anna was a widow who who lived all the time in the temple and was dependent upon the generosity of others to survive. None of them had a high status. It is the two most insignificant, the shepherds and Anna, who actually tell others about Jesus. They are the first disciples of Jesus to spread the message. Two insignificant people without status, Anna and the shepherds. For Luke, the message of Jesus is for those on the margins of society. This comes out clearly in Luke's version of the Beatitudes, but also throughout other stories in his gospel. Now for Matthew, when it comes to who recognizes Jesus for who he is, Matthew has Jesus recognized by the Magi. Matthew gives a message to his Jewish community. And the message is that the good news of Jesus is not limited to just the Jewish people, but is available to everyone. For Matthew, this is seen as a fulfillment of the messianic promises that speak about God's salvation being extended to all nations. And the Magi bring 3 gifts, each representing an aspect of Jesus' life. They bring gold, recognizing Jesus as king. They bring frankincense, recognizing Jesus' divinity. And they bring myrrh, a spice that is used to anoint the dead. Jesus will save the world through his death. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh all prefigure what Jesus' ministry and what his purpose is and who Jesus is. Additionally, Matthew also has Jesus' birth recognized by the larger cosmos. The Magi are following a star. So Jesus' salvation will not only reconcile humanity to God, but all of creation. So I hope this clarifies a little bit about the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke. Tomorrow, we'll be doing something a little bit different. So tune in tomorrow at 8 a.m. for the assignment. And hopefully it will get your spring break off to a good start.